So here's a few news articles. This one I thought was very interesting. Um, Georgia State University is being very successful even despite the coronavirus. And they explain how they do it here, and it really is very different than any college I've ever dealt with. They keep track of students a lot. So when students start having trouble making it to class or something, they contact them first. They don't wait for them to complain. They help them get financial aid. They have their own program for financial aid, and they will even detect when people need it and give it to them before they ask and things like that. They really take care of the students. And so they not only kept running even despite the coronavirus, because they're good at handling that too, they also decided to let in more students and more poor students, and just figured if they run their college efficiently enough, they can still take care of them. And apparently that is true. So this is, it's very interesting. This one, and I think also the University of, another university down south, are a few examples of people that are really extremely successful, even working with students who are from a very low income background and have a lot of problems. It can be done if the administration really takes care of them well. And so here's a whistleblower has talked about a California deputy who had to kill a teenager in order to join the gang in the department. And this was certainly true in Oakland. They had a group called the Oakland Riders that was based on a Clint Eastwood's Dirty Harry movies. The cops had a gang inside the police department where you had to prove that you were like particularly sadistic and cruel to get in. And apparently they've got another one in Los Angeles, which is famous for this kind of thing. And these things come out every few years. So you become an executioner, which is the elite gang of police if you have killed enough suspects. And you have to kill some to get in. And that's, very much like street gangs are on the outside. There are gangs inside police departments. And this one, a student was writing, a college was assigned essays to write, and the essays are being graded by an artificial intelligence program. Yeah, LA Ramparts is another one. Yeah, and the algorithm was very poor. So a student wrote an essay and only got 50%, and so then their parents said, "Well, let's figure out how the algorithm works," and they figured it out. All you have to do is use certain keywords frequently and write the first 2 sentences good, and then the rest is just gibberish containing keywords, and then you got 100% on everything. So it's an interesting example of lazy teaching and also of AI. A lot of people are very worried about AI taking jobs, and there may be something to that, but a lot of AI is pretty much just fake. It is very, very stupid, very, very limited, and it fools people. But there are getting to be more and more AI systems that can do things that are impressive. Like there's one recent public one that can really learn, understand, and write English pretty well. And they said it could replace a lot of reporters. So we'll see how it goes. So here's a group called Pone College, an education platform for students to learn cybersecurity. So you have a whole series. Anyway, it sounds kind of fun. The lectures are on YouTube, the classes are on Twitch. And they do relatively advanced stuff, hardcore stuff, sounds like about like our exploit development class, C compilation, OS internals, Linux layout. It sounds pretty interesting. So if anybody wants to try that, let me know how it goes. And I didn't know this, but San Francisco is trying to have a universal basic income, and apparently Oakland has one too. Andrew Yang wanted to do this as part of his presidential campaign, and I've been listening to his proposals and his podcasts, and it's very impressive. And especially in this time of coronavirus, people are really looking into just having universal basic income for everybody. And I didn't know some cities are planning to do it themselves, but they are. So that'll be interesting if that happens. And Trump's latest policy proposal, well, Trump doesn't have policies and he doesn't announce anything. He just does things. So Trump first said there is no virus, it's all a lie. Then he said it's just going away. Then he said nobody should wear masks because it doesn't matter. Then about a month ago, he said, well, you should all wear masks, but then he didn't wear a mask. And now he seems to have hired a new guy, a new Fox News fake doctor who knows nothing about this topic. He's a radiologist or something, who wants to have herd immunity. Herd immunity is a very stupid idea that they had in Britain that they pursued until the leader of Britain caught the virus. That changed his mind about that. But herd immunity amounts to just letting it spread and kill people and pretending that that's okay. And of course, like a forest fire, if you let it go and it burns until it burns out, then it stops sometime. And so you can say, there, I cured it, it stopped. You do have to sacrifice 2 million people dying, is the estimate I've seen. But if you're just willing to let 2 million people die, then it will stop. And of course, if the only thing you care about is the stock market and you don't value human life, then this seems like a good plan. And this is Trump's apparent latest plan. He's now telling people not to wear masks and to just open up and not social distance and everything. So it's he changes his mind every few days about this stuff, but it appears now that he's going with herd immunity. And of course, Fauci, who seems quite honest and quite reputable, is not saying use herd immunity, of course, because you'd have to write off a whole lot of lives. And but we don't appear to have any leadership or any authoritative figures that matter anymore. We just seem to have a dictator and his cronies who just do whatever he says. Anyway, so convalescent plasma was the latest thing Trump trumpeted as a huge advance. And of course, the medical research that any of us could read said it was just a preliminary trial without a control group. It didn't really prove that it worked at all. And now the National Institute of Health has said, don't use it, because as far as they can tell, there is no evidence for it. And now they probably never will have the evidence for it, because now after his public emergency authorization, it's going to be hard to have a proper test. So anyway, it's politics and not science. And obviously so will be the vaccine. He's now, they sent a message to all the states saying, get ready for a vaccine November 1. We're going to ram one through and just skip some of the testing and call it a vaccine and have it to you on November 1. So if that happens, I think a lot of people are going to be reluctant to take it. I think I will be, because they have skipped the year-long stage 3 trial where they test it for safety. And that is not a small thing to skip. But on the other hand, in a way it might be justified, because this virus is much, much worse than people thought. And now they found that young, healthy football players that get coronavirus, they test positive and they have no symptoms. 30% of them have serious heart damage. Myocarditis is heart swelling that limits their athletic performance and may have all kinds of consequences later in life. So apparently, you know, even getting it, if what you think is a mild case, is not a good thing. There's reports of brain damage and heart damage and getting it a second time. So you really don't want to get this thing. Anyway, Snowden is still in Russia. He had to flee the country after leaking information about an NSA mass surveillance program, and it was finally declared illegal. So this is why there are some people, and they've been talking about, some people say we should let Snowden come back and pardon him, and say that we regard what you did as generally a benefit, even though he absolutely did leak classified military secrets that he was not supposed to leak. So we will see what happens. For the time being, he's still hiding out in Russia, but it does seem like the program he exposed was in fact determined to be illegal. This one is pretty hilarious. I don't know why the Microsoft Defender, which is Microsoft's antivirus product, has now got an option to download files. They added it a couple versions ago, the -download file argument. So you can use the antivirus program to download a file, and you can use it to download malware. I guess you have to find a piece of malware it doesn't recognize, but they were able to download ransomware with Microsoft Windows Defender. So that's kind of a black eye for Microsoft. I hope they'll change that in the next version or something. First day is the first day, I think, in a long time without a lot of smoke, so I can actually breathe the air without. And now apparently Sunday it's going to start heating up again this weekend, and they say we're probably going to set world record heat out here, and that will probably start more fires. So our respite is apparently temporary. So Facebook is largely blamed for Trump being in office, and they make a lot of money by selling ads to foreign governments like Russia that want to manipulate the election, and gangs like Bannon's gang that push through Trump's election. And they do it by really dishonest targeted advertising. They buy ads that are false, and they carefully show those false ads to a small group of chosen people who will be affected by them, primarily to convince them not to bother to vote. And the Republicans count on this entirely. Trump has said many times, if they make me actually have to submit to fact checking, then Republicans will never win again. If they actually make it easy for people to vote, Republicans will never win again. Their entire power in the country is dependent on these techniques, and Facebook has totally been cooperating with it, but now people are getting really mad, so Facebook is doing more and more attempts to sort of look like they're doing something about it. So their latest thing is to say they're not going to allow any new election ads in the last 1 week before the election. And the Democrats have screamed and yelled and said that is not enough at all to stop the abuse of your system. And the Republicans, Trump has screamed and yelled saying that isn't going to give me the ability to put out ads I need in order to win the election. So, you know, in that respect, maybe Facebook's doing it right because they're getting yelled at from both sides. I think I probably would have done what Twitter did and just said, no political ads at all. I don't even want to be involved. That's probably what I would have done. Anyway. So this, I'll talk about more in my cybersecurity responsibilities class. This is extremely interesting. These guys wanted to find out what can happen in the upcoming election, and they got real experts, real people who have been running the top of government from sides, Republicans, Democrats, civil servants, and so on. They got them around a table, and then they had scenarios based on what the most likely things that will happen is. Like the only one that leads to peaceful resolution is if Biden wins with a large majority in a landslide. That probably would lead to a peaceful transition of power. But the other scenarios pretty much don't, and it's really interesting scenarios here. I'm talking about how if if you can do things like put out false stories on social media that Biden had a heart attack the day of the election, so his people don't vote. And if Biden wins, but there are still some votes that haven't been counted, then they can talk about there's all vote by mail fraud. And then they talk about the many things that can happen here. It is very interesting. And we will live through some of these. And this is what you do at companies to prepare for cyber attacks. And you have these tabletop exercises where you say, what if this bad thing happens? What would we do? What would you do? What would happen next? And then you hopefully are more prepared for it. The military does this too, to plan military campaigns. Anyway, all right, so we're here. Let's see, I think, yeah, here we are. All right, so here we are, 141, and we're going to talk about randomness, and then I'll talk about this Windows Crypt Tool product for the 102 and 103, and that's my plan for today. So let's take a look at the slides for chapter 2. So let me make them big. All right, so we're going to talk about what randomness is. It's a probability distribution, and then we'll talk about entropy. Entropy is a concept that came from physics, but it's really a statistical concept, and it's how you measure the quality of randomness. And then we'll talk about the different types of random number generators and what goes wrong with them. Random number generators turn out to be very difficult to make and to lead to a lot of problems. So the problem is if you have a random number generator like this one, and it just gives you 99999, then is that a good random number generator or not? And the fact is, you don't know. How can there be a series of numbers? How can you decide if those numbers are random? In fact, any Saturn series of numbers could happen with some probability by random chance. So what does it mean to say it's random? Is this more random than that? In fact, they're both equally likely. But if you give a description of this one as, say, 3 zeros and 5 ones, and that's all you say about it, then there are, in fact, many patterns of bits that fit within that description. So if you see something that looks like it, that's more likely than this number, which there's only one of. So you have to be very careful what you talk about when you try to determine whether something is random. So there's a probability distribution is a common way to do this. So if you have a fair coin and you flip it a large number of times, you will observe 50% heads and 50% tails. Fair die, you have 1/6 chance of each of the numbers and so on. That's called a uniform distribution, when every possible outcome has an equal chance of happening. It's also called white in the terms of white noise, where every possible frequency in a sound has an equal amplitude. So entropy is a mathematical measure of disorder, and white noise is the most disordered possible state. And the reason why this is important in physics is because the universe started in a fairly ordered state, such as, for example, the black hole, everything squashed down into one point, and then it explodes and starts spreading out like smoke, dissipating through a room. And the state where it's all totally smeared out evenly everywhere is the maximum disorder, and we are living through the process of an ordered state decaying into a disordered state. And entropy is the measure of time. And as you move forward in time, the entropy increases. The place becomes more disordered because the probability favors moving towards a more disordered state because there are more disordered states than ordered states. So if you break glass, it breaks into a million pieces and you can't put it back together again, not easily. Anyway, so that's the game. So if you have a distribution of something with probabilities, you determine the entropy this way. You take the probability of an event times the log to the base 2 of that probability and add those up. Add up those numbers. So here's an example. If you have one random bit, you have probabilities 1/2 and 1/2. This is one coin flipping. So it's -1/2 log of 1/2, -1/2 log of 1/2. The log of 1/2 to the base 2 is -1 because 2 to the -1 is 1/2. So this is 1. You call that 1 bit. And of course, that's what you'd think. If I have one number that can be either 0 or 1, we call that a bit, and that is 1 bit of information. What Shannon discovered, Claude Shannon, is that in computer programming terms, entropy is also describable as information. And this is why if I have a file, like a Microsoft Word document, that has like 1,000 zeros in a row, because there's white space in a file, that file has low information content. It's wasting a lot of space. If it's a 10 kilobyte file, it doesn't need to be a 10 kilobyte file. So you could run it through WinZip. It'll shrink down to a 1 kilobyte file because it squeezes the air out of it. And then that file will be highly disordered. Every byte will be full of information. And there's a certain compression level where it can't be compressed anymore because you have made it as small as you can without losing the information in it. That's what Shannon entropy is. It's a measure of information. And 1 bit that could be either 0 or 1 has 1 bit of information in it. So a random byte could have any number from 0 to 255, so 256 possible values. There's 256 equal values, and so the entropy is -1/256 to the log of 1/256, added up for 256 terms, and that adds up to 8. So as you would expect, 1 byte with 8 bits, if each bit has an equal chance of being 0 or 1, that has 8 bits of entropy, or 8 bits of information in it, which is what you would have. Now, if you have a non-random bit, like you have a bit, but it's always 0 and never 1, then that's 0. It has no information. You can't store any data in that bit. It's just always in the same state. It's like a message painted on the wall. All right. And so you can do this easily in Python. If you import math, then you've got log to the base 2. So here's the even one where you have the probability of 0.5 and 0.5. And now you add up the entropy. It starts at 0, and then you subtract p times math log of p, and you'll get the entropy of 1. And you can do that for a byte, where you have 8 probabilities, each 1/8, 0.125. And when you add them up, you get an entropy of 3 here in this measurement. I forget why. It's really the power. You got 8 bits. Well, that's right, 3. This is entropy of 3 because it has 3 bits of data. It takes 3 bits to encode a number that can have 8 combinations. Okay, so that's right. 3 bits of information are encoded in a number that has 8 possible values. And a byte would have 8. Here's the weighted coin. If you have a 90% chance of 0 and a 10% chance of 1, then the entropy is only half a bit, 0.46. As you would imagine, that's less information than a byte that could go either way, but more information than a byte that's always 100% one way, which would have an entropy of 0. So that's how Shannon entropy works. And let's take a look at the cahoots, which are here. right, we might get up to 18. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, looks like that's it. All right, so what's the log of 1/4 to the base 2? It's -2. 2 to the -1 is a half, and 2 to the -2 is a quarter. That's how it works. All right, what's the entropy of one random bit? Okay, that's 1 bit of data. All right. All right, what's the entropy of a random byte? All right, 8 bits in a byte. And if it's random, they all contain information, so it's 8 bits. All right, what's the entropy of a single random base 64 character? All right, that's 6 bits. 8 bits give you 256 possible values, and 6 bits gives you 64 values. So that's 6 bits of information encoded in one base 64 character. And so it is BH. Jay, you guys can tell me a longer name in the chat if you want to make sure you get your points, especially Jay. In fact, I think you're all going to have to tell me your real name if you want your points, because those all look like incomplete or fake names. Anyway, aha, good, okay. I got Claude's ghost, good. All right. Anyway, Jay, good, okay, good. Okay. Good. And now I've got all your names. Good, I'm recording them. Okay, good. All right, so let's talk about random number generators. There's random number generators and there is pseudo-random number generators. Now, real randomness has to come from something that is random in the world, and the problem is there's nothing random in computers normally. The whole point of computers is to be deterministic, to have bits that are 0 or 1 and algorithms that flip them, and the memory is supposed to remember the number correctly, and the processor is supposed to do the math correctly, so there's nothing random. So what most computers have is just pseudo-random numbers, which are numbers that look random but aren't really random. So, but one thing you could do is have a special hardware chip to measure some real randomness, like the current flowing through a resistor. If you measure it with great precision, it's random because the atoms in the resistor move randomly, causing tiny fluctuations in its resistance. So you can try that. There's a quantum random noise generator, which essentially is that one. You can also use radioactive decay or photons picked up in a very dark room where the photons are rare. There's some noise in that you can pick up from a real physical process that would be really random, and then you'd have a really random number generator. But a pseudo-random noise generator takes a small number of random bits and manages to mix them with something else to create a large artificial random bits. So you have an analog source of some kind giving you some real random numbers, and then you run it through some kind of algorithm to create a lot more bits from those small number of bits. And so it receives random bits from the random number generator at regular intervals, and then it has an entropy pool, which is just sort of a list of random bits it's created. And then it mixes those pools bits together and runs them through a mathematical routine to create more random number bits. It uses a deterministic random bit generator, which given a pattern of bits will just create a longer pattern of bits. And it takes the real random bits and multiplies them into longer amounts of bits. So you can initialize the entropy pool, you can refresh it using random data called reseeding, and you can calculate the next random bits. So this is what's going on with the random number functions in your languages. So backtracking resistance means that you cannot recover the previously generated bits. There's no pattern you can discern. And prediction resistance means you cannot predict future bits. Obviously, you don't want either of those to work. So here's a big issue. I mean, this is the issue of forward secrecy. The NSA has been archiving an incredible amount of data, basically all the data from the phone networks and internet of all of America and really most of the world for years in a giant data center in Utah, this huge thing, and they're storing all this data, and a lot of that data is encrypted. But since it's encrypted using older routines that do not have forward secrecy, if they are able to eventually find the key later, they can go back and decrypt all that archived data. Now, forward secrecy is a property of TLS 1.3, where every transmission uses a different key, so that even if you preserve a transmission and then somebody finds the key later, they could only decrypt that one transmission. They wouldn't be able to find a master key and decrypt all the data they've been collecting for years. But we've only all been using TLS 1.3 for a year or two. And that was one of the results of the Snowden revelation. And I think some versions of 1.2 can do it too. But anyway, there it is, this giant data warehouse where the government is archiving an incredible amount of data. Much of it they cannot read, but they're hoping to eventually find the key somewhere and be able to read it. So to achieve these resistances, you have to make these operations irreversible, so you can't determine the previously generated bits to go back. And to prevent forward prediction, you have to refresh it with really random bits that have no pattern, so that the random numbers you create later do not depend on numbers that came up in the past. All right, so Bruce Schneier, very famous cryptographer, greatly respected, and Neil Ferguson made this random number generator. This is what Windows uses. It has 32 entropy pools, and it creates pseudo-random bits. Mac and iOS use Yarrow, which is another one, also using Schneier. And so the problem is, it is possible that you use up too much randomness and you run out of randomness. Now, some of these will just keep running and produce lower quality pseudo-random bits, so they will begin not to have the desirable statistical properties. Another thing it could do is stop delivering bits, and people argue about what the best thing to do is here. Cryptographic, to have something be cryptographically secure, then you really want to be very careful. And so you want an unpredictable random number generator. Though that would be cryptographic, but a lot of the ones created in programming languages are non-cryptographic. They have statistical randomness, which means that every possible outcome has an equal probability, but they don't worry about whether you can predict the future from the past. And so this is why if you read blogs and posts, they'll often talk about how there are 2 or 3 different random number generators in Python and C, and only some of them should be used for cryptography. The others are there for things like games and other applications where you don't need such high quality randomness. So here's some real world examples. In Unix, there's urandom that gets its data from the cryptographic pseudo-random number generator. And this is high quality, but it's non-blocking, so the entropy can run low and it will still produce bits. This one here is blocking, dev random. If there is not enough real entropy from real random sources, it will not produce data. So blocking seemed like a good idea, but it turned out to be a bad idea because it creates a way for an attacker to attack you by just using up the entropy. So they say in practice, it's better to be non-blocking. All right, And I noticed this myself. This affected me. I put up a product, a hacking game for people to play, and it was written on a Tomcat server running on Java. And it took 45 minutes to boot up my server, which really confused me. Students would complain saying the server has crashed. I'd restart it, and then it wouldn't come up. Then I'd struggle and give up and get frustrated, go to sleep. When I wake up in the morning, it's up again. And I finally realized it takes 45 minutes to boot up, and that's because when it boots up, Tomcat has to refresh some random keys, and it has to do it from Entropy, and there was not enough Entropy on my server. So I had to generate this Havged, this program you install, and it creates more Entropy on your server, and now the server would boot up in 10 seconds. It's amazing. I wouldn't have believed it if somebody had told me this. And when I read this, I said, that can't be right. But it is apparently right. This is the way to add more Entropy to your server. So you can see the Entropy pool. Now I was able to do this on a local Kali machine. I tried to do it on a Google Cloud server and it didn't work. So my impression is that Google Cloud servers are connected to something at Google that creates a lot of Entropy. But if you run this on a local machine, you can use this command to see the Entropy available. There's just a visible number available from the kernel to see the Entropy available, and this will consume Entropy. This just reads something from dev random and prints it out on the screen. So if I run it here and see the Entropy available, it has like 2,000 bits of Entropy. But if I start running this thing to use them up, you can see it fall down really small to where the number of bits is really small. And I just run of these every few seconds, it'll use it up. But if you install Havged, now it stays high no matter what you do, because it's got a high quality source of Entropy. That means I cannot use it up fast enough to drain it down by any significant amount. So anyway, that's fine. I'm not going to do it live. It only works on a local virtual machine, but it was kind of fun to see that. All right, so in Windows, you have this thing called crypt-gen random, now bcrypt-gen random, and this takes Entropy from a kernel mode driver. So Intel decided to help this. There turned out to be some serious problems from lack of Entropy and randomness. So they added in Ivy Bridge a hardware random number generator. So they added part of the chip to actually measure the random variations of a real electric process in the chip. And they said, there, now you have real random numbers to use. The problem is people refuse to use it just because Intel made it, because you can't test it. And they're afraid that NSA would put a backdoor in it. And this is a big deal. Microsoft in 2007 was one of the early companies to do this. Their researchers found that the National Institute of Standards elliptic cryptography, which we're going to talk about in a later chapter, had a suspicious property. They were not able to prove that the NSA had in fact backdoored it, but they showed that the NSA tells you to use certain constants for the curve, and it is possible that those constants are concealing a secret constant, which can be used to predict the numbers. They said this stuff could be backdoored so that the apparently random output is not random, and we would never know. And that started this. They did not intentionally say that NIST put a backdoor in this pseudo-random number generator, but they said they could have. The mathematics makes that possible, and we have no way to know if that's what happened. And so Schneier wrote about this, and he said, the NSA strongly recommended this, even though it's 1,000 times slower than other options. And that is very suspicious, because that makes it sound like they are not seriously trying to choose the best algorithm to benefit the world, but they're just forcing us to use something they have poisoned, which they have absolutely done before with the Clipper chip and TES. And now it leaked out. Documents, Snowden, among those Snowden leaks I mentioned, he leaked out the evidence that they absolutely did this, and in fact, they've been doing it everywhere. Here's the millions of dollars being spent on SIGINT enabling every year, and SIGINT enabling is bribing people in private companies to build commercial systems that are cryptographically broken so the NSA can get in. And this is why the cryptographers are very, very angry. Our government that is supposed to be helping secure us is in fact promoting and tricking us into using unsafe stuff that's broken that you can get into. Now, if you really trust the government, the NSA's plan was to have this property called NOBUS, nobody but us. They wanted to put subtle flaws in the cryptographic system that only they could exploit. And the question is, do you believe that the NSA is really so far ahead of all the criminals and foreign governments in the world that they can put a weak spot in that nobody else will ever find, or not? And unfortunately, I think the evidence is very strong that they are not able to do that because they leaked all their secrets several times. So apparently they can't keep a secret way in and not let someone hide. And no, Jimmy's asking about the Clipper chip. The government made the Clipper chip the standard, and they told everyone to use data encryption standard knowing it was broken. They didn't exactly forbid longer keys because they can't do that in America. What they did was they made it the government standard to use 56-bit DES, even though the IBM system it was based on had 128-bit keys. They weakened it to a low, and then they spread it everywhere and told everyone to use it, and it was broken. It was not, the keys were too short. And so it is the general belief of everybody in the cryptography space is that their powerful computers could break the 56-bit key, but nobody else could. And that was what they did. They've always done the same thing. The mission of the NSA is not to protect our privacy. It's quite the opposite. Their job is signals intelligence. They're supposed to be able to find all the secrets in the world and tell the government so they can use it. So they really don't want anybody having any encryption they can't break. And they're using all these. Now, the National Institute of Standards is supposed to be there to just tell the truth, just sort of like the Center for Disease Control is supposed to tell the truth. But in the last 2 weeks, it has been incredibly blatant that Trump has pressured them into lying about the coronavirus, which destroys their credibility. And the same thing happened between the NSA and the NIST in the 70s and the 80s. The NSA secretly pressured NIST into lying about cryptography and telling people techniques were safe when they weren't safe. So, and now, because of Snowden, we absolutely know they're doing that. They're influencing policies and standards and inserting vulnerabilities. And so they are bribing people and coercing people and tricking people into building broken systems that are easier to hack into, which is, places cryptographers on the on the opposite side of national security agency signals intelligence people. And it's a deep conflict. It's not like one side is 100% wrong. They both have reasons for doing what they're doing. You want to secure data so people don't have their credit card numbers and passwords stolen, but the NSA really wants to read stuff and spy on stuff to protect the nation. So there's just a battle there. So anyway, they finally formally abandoned their tainted random number generator, this one here. Anyway, so that's the political side, which is a big issue. But then there's just the mathematical side to develop the system. So Netscape's SSL in 1996, which is really a long time ago in the world of computer programming and cryptography, they used a couple of numbers that looked pretty random, process ID and the system time in microseconds, but those were relatively predictable. So the total entropy of that thing was only 47 bits. Then there was a test in 2012 where they just got all the HTTPS certificates available on the internet, and they tested them to see if they used the same prime numbers. And it turned out that a lot of them, 27,000 of the 7 million, used the same prime factor. And that means somehow they're not choosing random prime numbers when they generate public keys. Those public keys are somehow predictable. And there was an argument for a year or two about what caused this, and they eventually determined that it was in fact caused by insufficient entropy. You have something like a firewall that boots up, and while it boots up, there's a certain time and it decides it's time to make a random key, so then it starts the random key generation, and that draws on the chips, the clock at that time. And if you have 1 million of those that are sold and they're all identical hardware and identical software, when you boot them up, of course, there's a pretty good chance that some of them will happen to be at the exact same number of microseconds when they start up, and they'll end up generating the same key. And that's what happened. There's just a lot of systems like that that use poor quality randomness and end up having the same so-called random number. And that, of course, ruins the whole plan. If you don't really have a random key that nobody can guess, then all your cryptographic security is not as good as you think it is. So anyway, here's another example of a non-cryptographic pseudo-random number generator where it just generated a token. It looked pretty good, but it's called a Mercian twister, which is a predictable series of semi-random looking numbers. And CryptoCat had an off by 1 error in its. CryptoCat was a encrypted chat client designed by a guy for people to use at the time of the Arab Spring in Egypt, is when I heard about it. And its main thing about it was easy to use, and it was more secure than Twitter, which was completely unencrypted at that time. But in fact, it had a lot of cryptographic errors. and got a really bad reputation. And then after a few audits, he added a lot of updates. But anyway, here again, he made mistakes and didn't have as much randomness as he should have had in it. Anyway, so I got a few more cahoots about that, which is 2B here. All right, I think we could get a few more. I'll wait a few more seconds. All right. So which item harvests entropy from the keyboard and mouse? Okay, that's a real random number generator. Those are effectively random activities coming from user input. All right. All right, which one updates the entropy pool? Okay, that's the pseudo-random number generator. Fills the entropy pool with random bits from the random number generator. All right. And what PRNG algorithm does the Mac use? They call it Yarrow. All right. And what source of random bits is recommended on Linux? Random. I thought it was urandom. Let me go back to the slides. I'm actually a little troubled about that one. That was back here. All right. Okay, random runs out of entropy. Oh, that I had them backwards in my mind. Okay, random is the one that's blocking, which they've decided was a bad idea. Urandom is non-blocking. It will keep giving you bits, even if it has to give you low quality bits, and that is currently considered to be the best solution. All right, so Juarez. Ghost. Elam 3. Okay, good. I know the names this time. Good enough names. All right. So let me just talk about the projects. What's the difference between blocking and non-blocking? A blocking source of random bits will refuse to give you bits if there's not enough real randomness. So you'll ask for them and not get them. A non-blocking one will still give you bits when you ask for them, even if it has to settle for bits that are not quite as random. That's the difference between blocking and non-blocking. All right, so in the project, which is here, I just thought I'd show you this, the Windows-based projects. And it's a good thing I did because the download link had changed, so that may have confused people that were doing it. So the Caesar cipher is here. Let me open this. You have to install this software on Windows. Any Windows machine will do. And I just uploaded this link so you can get the latest version of CryptTool. So here's my cloud machine and here's CryptTool. You just download and install this thing. And it's just a GUI Windows-based tool that makes it easy to practice using cryptography. When I first saw this, I was pretty excited. Now that I can do all this stuff in Python, I'm less excited about it, but a lot of people do like this thing. So anyway, you might like it. And so here it is. All right, so if you use the wizard, you can try different kinds of math, and I think what we want to do is cryptanalysis. Yep, cryptanalysis. Next. Classic is good. We're going to do the old-fashioned classical encryption at the moment, although this can do some modern stuff too. And we'll start with the Caesar cipher, which we've already talked about. It's going to start with an example in German. And if you run it on that, it will decrypt it. And it's then a German article about Caesar. And it found the key is this shift, 5 characters. And if you scroll down, you can see how it works. It works by frequency analysis. So it figured out how frequent certain letters were. Like J is very common, and then S, and then W. And in German, J is very common. In English, it's E. And so they were able to take the frequency analysis and figure out what the shift is, because they just find out what the most common letter in the encrypted stuff is and how much they have to shift it to match the expected most common letter and so on. It's very quick to break it with frequency analysis. Any monoalphabetic substitution cipher is very easy to crack with this technique because the letters have a non-even probability distribution. And this is an example of why you want that property we were talking about, random numbers. You really want everything to be equally likely. You do not want the ciphertext to have any patterns like this, or it will be a way to break the encryption. You want an encryption scheme that just has every possible output byte equally probable. So there's no pattern here to exploit. All right. And so there are some challenges here. There's an English one that you have to crack. And then there's another English one that you cannot do with this, but you'll have to sort of do it in a semi-manual way. And here's another one where you'll have to either do it completely by hand or search for a better tool because it's too short and repetitive. Anyway, so those are some simple Caesar ciphers. And here is monoalphabetic substitution. So let's take a look at that. Monoalphabetic substitution is here. Cryptanalysis. And classic. And not Caesar, but monoalphabetic substitution. The difference being, instead of shifting every letter forward a certain number of spaces in the alphabet, it can replace every letter with any other letter. So here's the example. And the attack has gotten much faster now, and it explains what it is. But you can see the data decrypting here. In cryptography, a substitution cipher is a method of encryption. And so if you get down here, here's the key. The key is this alphabet. So A goes to Y, B goes to A, C goes to N. There's no simple pattern. And so actually, there's a lot of possible combinations, and it actually uses quite a bit of clever techniques to decrypt this stuff, which are explained in the help page. This is a really quite sophisticated program, uses several automated ways to attack these. But anyway, that's how it looks. And you've got some challenges here where you decrypt some stuff. Here's some of the attacks that are used. And so here's an English paragraph to crack. And here's a simple English sentence to crack. So anyway, that's the Windows-based crypt tool. And I see we've still got time. I think we might talk about these binary games a little more, because I don't think we talked about modular arithmetic last time. And this is important, modular arithmetic and XOR. So let's take a look at that. So here is modular arithmetic. Modular arithmetic is math taking place on a ring. So you have a ring like a clock face, and you call it modulus 9 if there are 9 symbols. And typically, you go from 0 to the modulus number -1. That's how you do it. So there is no 9. There's only from 0 to 8. And if you have 8 and you add 1, you get 9. 8 and you add 2, you get 1 again. And so you go. That's modular arithmetic. And you got negative numbers. You could add numbers. I think we talked about this before. So let me just go to the binary games and see if you can do it. Well, I guess I don't have the right system to make you do it live here. So I'll just demonstrate a few of these. So 8 mod 9, well, the numbers 0 through 8 are not changed. So that's 8. But 80 mod 9 has gone many times around the circle. So the way you do it is you divide by 9 and you take the remainder. So this is 72 plus 8. So 72 is an integral multiple of 9 and you throw it away, and what's left is 8. And minus 8 mod 9, you can add any multiple of 9 to it. So if you add 9 to it, it turns into 1. So that gets you there. 2 mod 7 is 2, and on you go. So that's a simple case. Now the other one that I wanted to talk about was XOR, and I think that'll be it for today. XOR we're going to use a lot, and you should get used to it. So if you have one bit, 0 XOR 0 is 0, but 0 XOR 1 is 1. You think of this as false and 1 is true, and the exclusive OR is one of these things is true, but not both. You always add in a positive direction. There is no, in what? In XOR or in the Caesar cipher? Oh, in the modular arithmetic are you talking about? Jimmy? Well, I think you're probably talking about the modular arithmetic, and you can add or subtract. So adding goes to bigger numbers and subtracting goes to smaller numbers, just like on a number line. Anyway, so 0 XOR 1 is 1, and 1 XOR 0 is 1, but 1 XOR 1 is 0 again. So that's the, in Python, you use that character to represent XOR. So you can do it here, 0 XOR 0 is 0, but 0 XOR 1 is 1. You can XOR bits one by one, and if you XOR larger things like bytes, you just do the bits independently. So here's 2 bits, 0, 0 XOR 0, 1. You just take the left bit, 0, and XOR it with this to get 0. You take the right bit, 0, and XOR it with 1 to get 1. So that's how it works. And you can do that in Python with 0b to make bits. You can XOR them. And it'll then print the answer in base 10. If you want it to print the answer in binary, you have to use the bin function to see the output in binary. And so you can do 4 bits, and that's the game here. So let's take a look at some of this, which is here, the XOR game. All right, so 7 XOR 5. And let me just demonstrate this. So in order to do it, you have to be pretty good at binary. So you have to take 7 and 5, and you have to put them in binary. So 7 is 1, 1, 1, and 5 is 1, 0, 1. So the XOR is 1 and 1 is 0, 1 and 0 is 1, and 1 and 1 is 0 going down. So this is 2. And 8 XOR 1, I have 8, which is 1, 0, 0, 0, and 1, which is 0, 0, 0, 1. And so the XOR is 1, 0, 0, 1. These are 2 zeros that give me 0. This is a 1 and a 0 to give me 1, and a 0, 1 to give me 1, and that is 9. So that's how it works. And I guess I'll do one more, and that'll be it. 5 XOR 1. Okay, that's 5, which is 1, 0, 1, and 1 is 0, 0, 0, 1. So this is 0, 1, 0, 0. So the answer is 4. And you can see why it's it's used in encryption because it has a sort of strange property. The results you get, this turns into 4, and this turned into 2, and this turned into 9, and you can see how it sort of randomly changes the numbers. Even passing something through one round of XOR makes it look very random, and it's part of by itself, it's not strong enough to be a strong cipher, but it's part of strong ciphers like AES. All right, so I think that's enough lecture and demonstration. I think I'm down to just answering questions. Would I explain modular division? Okay, I can do that. Oh, there is no modular division. All right, so all right, you've asked for it. Let me go to the last one. That's the question. Okay, that's the last one, which is inverses. So let's do that. I was going to put it off till next time, but since you asked, we'll just do it now. So I'll go to binary games. This is modular arithmetic. So good. All right. So here we're going to do multiplicative inverses. The problem with modular arithmetic is there is no division. There's addition and subtraction and multiplication, but there is no division. So here's the modulus 9 like we talked about. 10 is 1, 11 is 2, 12 is 3, as you might go around twice. And so you can multiply. 2 times 9, mod 9, is you start here and go forward by 9, taking you back to 0, and then you go around again, taking you back to 0. You can do it symbolically. 2 times 9 mod 9, you can distribute it, make it 2 mod 9 times 0 mod 9, and that's 2 times 0, so that's 0. How about 2 times 10 mod 9? You could take 20 and divide by 9 and have a remainder of 2, 18 plus 2, so the answer is 2. Or you could take 2 mod 9 times 10 mod 9, and that would be 2 times 1, so that's one way to get there. Now, consider this. If I take 2 times 9 mod 9, I get 0. If I take 2 times 10, I get 2. If I take 2 times 5 mod 9, I get 1. Okay, because 2 times 5 is 10. Therefore, 2 times 5 equals 1. 5 is therefore the multiplicative inverse of 2. If you double something on a ring of 9, and then you multiply it by 5, you'll get back where you started, because the 2 times 5 amounts to 1. The end result is multiplying it by 1. So you can see that here. So if I have a number like 3, and I double it, I get 6. But if I now multiply it by 5, I get 30, and that's 27 plus 3, so I'm back to 3. So this is what you have instead of division. You have a multiplicative inverse, but only about half the numbers have a multiplicative inverse. It depends on whether the modulus is prime or not. Only some of the numbers have modulus. Well, there are some numbers that destroy information, and you cannot reverse multiplying by them. But if there, sometimes there exists a multiplicative inverse, and on modulus 9, the multiplicative inverse of 2 is 5. So I hope that helps. For example, here's a number without an inverse, 6. If I take 6 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can see 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 3, 6 times 3 is 0. Now I add another 6 and I'm back to 6. So as I take all these 8 different numbers and multiply them, I just get the same 3 numbers over and over. So multiplying a number by 6 destroys information. You cannot go back because there are several different numbers that would have turned into the same value. That's called a lossy transformation. And therefore, there is no inverse. This is an information destroying operation, and you can't use that for cryptography because you want to encrypt something, you want there to be some way to decrypt it. So you want the ciphertext to contain all the information that was in the plain text. All right, and so here's 7. You can find the multiplicative inverse of 7. You just have to take 7 times 1, 7 times 2, 7 times 3. And when you get to 7 times 4, you get 28, which is 27 plus 1. So you just try numbers until you find one that results in 1, and now you've found the multiplicative inverse, if there's going to be one. All right, and here's another one, modulus 4, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So you have 0, 1, 2, and 3, and 4 is 0, and 5 is 1, and so on. All right, so let's try a few of these and see if it helps. All right. The multiplicative inverse of 7 mod 10. Now, the way we're doing this here, there are faster techniques, but for what we're doing here, we're just going to take 7 times 1, and that's 7. And 7, let me just fill in a little chart here. All right. And 7 times 2 is 14, which is 10 plus 4, so I keep the 4. 7 times 3 is 21, and that's 1, modulus 10. So there it is. 3 is the inverse. Okay? And 10 times 3 mod 6, that's 30, which is 5 times 6, so it's 0. And on you go. 8 times 3 mod 9 is 24. Mod 9, which is 18 plus 6, so that's a 6. And the multiplicative inverse of 3, mod 4, is going to be like this. 3 times 1 equals 3. 3 times 2 is 6, which is 4 plus 2, so I keep the 2. 3 times 3 is 9, which is 2 4s, 8 plus 1, and that's 1, so 3 is its own inverse. If you multiply by 3, you can multiply by 3 again to get back where you started. So I hope that helps. I think I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll stick around to answer questions.